All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman. And today we learned that the Falcons are one of several teams interested in trading for Houston Texans quarterback Deshaun Watson. We will do our best to try to unpack that and more on today's Locked on Falcons.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans, writing weekly content for the Falcoholic, the SB Nation website for the Atlanta Falcons, and of course, the host of this world-renowned Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I want to thank everyone that makes Locked On Falcons their first listen each and every day. Of course, Locked On Falcons is free and available on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, as well as on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel and give us a like when you do. So today's episode is going to be mostly about the Falcons' rumored interest in Deshaun Watson. We'll be trying our best to unpack that. At the end of the episode, we'll talk about the other quieter moves that the Falcons wound up making on Tuesday in Younghoe Koo, signing him to a contract extension, tendering Olamide Zaccheaus, losing Russell Gage to free agency with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and cutting Tyler Davison. But, you know, it's funny because like early this morning, I sat down with Josh Kendall of The Athletic, who covers the Falcons for that website, and talked with him briefly about, you know, some of the things ongoing this week with the idea like, oh, I only talked to Josh for like 12 minutes and thinking, okay, that will be half of an episode. And there'll be something that happens with the Falcons I can talk about for the rest of the episode. And what's funny is we were joking on that episode, like, oh, well, something's going to happen after, you know, we get off air. And, you know, like within an hour, I think I said within a day, and Josh joked within an hour, that something was going to happen that we would want to wind up talking about. And then literally I think 64 minutes later, you know, the Deshaun Watson news broke. And that was that Adam Schefter, of ESPN alongside Chris Mortensen, and that was further followed up by Ian Rappaport of NFL Network, basically saying that the Falcons were going to meet with Deshaun Watson. That meeting is scheduled for Wednesday today, as most of you are listening and or watching this. The only person that really kind of refuted this report that the Falcons have legit interest in it was Jason La Canfora of CBS Sports, and La Canfora is rather infamous among, you know, football fans and whatnot and media folks that his reports typically aren't necessarily the most accurate. So if Jason La Canfora is the only person out here saying this is all a smokescreen, you know, it's not a great place to be if you're wanting to believe that. And so, you know, the report from Ian Rappaport on Tuesday afternoon was basically that, you know, after Watson meets with the Falcons on Wednesday, he's meeting with the Browns on Tuesday, or today, after, you know, before you guys are listening to this, he's already met with the Saints and the Panthers. Those were the two teams that were considered the front runners in that conversation. You know, basically Wednesday, we could find out that Deshaun Watson is getting traded. So we'll just sort of have to see how that goes. But, you know, getting back to the point of people saying that, oh, this is a smokescreen, the Falcons are only just talking to Watson so that they can drive up the price. That's not really how it works, because Deshaun Watson has a no trade clause. And that basically means he can choose where he's going to wind up going. And so by default, any team talking to him has to basically is saying that we're willing to make a trade for you. And the Falcons seemingly are very high on Deshaun Watson's list, with reports coming from Diana Rossini saying that basically Deshaun Watson is the one that sort of pushed this out there. So if you want to have a saving grace as far as the Falcons, maybe they're just only sort of doing their due diligence on Deshaun Watson to see if they can acquire him. But getting back to that whole no trade thing, just think back last week to the Russell Wilson situation, where there were reports that came out after he was traded to Denver that, Washington potentially would have offered more for Russell Wilson, but he would not have waived his no trade clause in order to go to Washington, basically, dictating that Denver was the place that he wanted to go. And so, one of the other interesting nuggets that we learned on Tuesday from Adam Schefter in a report that he put out on ESPN is that Matt Ryan also has a no trade clause, which only further complicates this subject. But when you think about why the Falcons would be interested in Watson, we'll touch upon that a little bit later in terms of the football aspect of it. But what's notable is that Deshaun Watson does have connections to this organization. He is a local guy. He comes from Gainesville, which is next door to Flowery Branch, where the Falcons headquarters are. He was a Falcons ball boy in his youth, as well known by Arthur Blank, and reportedly his family, as someone that he's grown close to over the years. Warwick Dunn, who is a Falcons minority owner, has a close connection to Deshaun Watson's family, having, part of his charity foundation is to buy homes for single mothers. And Deshaun Watson's mother was one of those mothers that they bought a home for in like 2007. So, the people at the highest orders of this organization have a well-known relationship with Deshaun Watson, and presumably can vouch for the man. You also have a coach in TJ Yates, who's the Falcons, whatever his passing game specialist, I think, is his official title. And TJ Yates was a teammate of Deshaun Watson in Houston, as well as his position coach in Houston in Deshaun Watson's last season there in 2020, where he played. So again, if any organization among these teams like the Saints and the Panthers and the Browns are willing to sign off on the person that is Deshaun Watson, it is, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, it is the Atlanta Falcons. So I think I'm sure plenty of people will jump into the comments and proclaim this is fake and this is not real. It's real, guys. And the question, of course, is really, is it real enough where the Falcons will actually pull off this trade? And that does remain to be seen. That is, as I said earlier, a complicated situation, not only by how, the salary cap works and how trades work, but also by the looming legal issues and potential suspension hanging over the head of Deshaun Watson. And we'll get into that as we continue today's Locked on Falcons podcast. But before we get there, elsewhere in the Atlanta sports world, there's big news with the Braves moving on from my cousin Freddie. Good luck to you, Freddie. We'll see you at the family reunion. But they've made potential moves to replace Freddie Freeman. And so go find out, what that means for the Braves team by checking out the Locked on Braves podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network. And of course, you can find Locked on Braves on all the same podcast platforms that you can find Locked on Falcons, including on YouTube. So guys, this time of year, it's, March Madness, and we're well into the year and well past, that point where, a lot of people have already given up on their New Year's resolutions. And if yours was to eat healthy, maybe you've already given up, but you can get back on that bandwagon, particularly as you're glued to your television to watch all these college basketball games, or glued to your phone as you're waiting to see what happens with Deshaun Watson and the Atlanta Falcons over the next week or so. And you got to have fuel for that. And, Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on the market, because it tastes just like a candy bar, and it gives you that good fuel that is good for you, tastes good, is good for you, because Built Bars are low in sugar, they're low in calories, low in carbs, but they're high in protein, high in fiber. They come in a variety of different flavors, and they have limited time flavors all the time. And one is Rocky Road, which includes marshmallows and almonds. They also have other Built Bar flavors that include marshmallows like churro puff and banana cream pie. You can also get the white chocolate shamrock if you like mint in chocolate, but you prefer white chocolate over regular chocolate. And of course, you can always head on over to built.com and find all the tried and true flavors. Some of the popular ones are coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, cookies and cream, salted caramel, and so much more. So go find your favorite flavor of Built Bar, the protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar, by heading over to built.com and use the promo code LOCKED15 and you'll get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. So when we talk about this Deshaun Watson trade, again, we talked about a little bit of the why and the how. The why, again, probably the most controversial thing I'll probably wind up saying on this podcast is, why would the Falcons make this move? Well, because they believe that Deshaun Watson is a better quarterback than Matt Ryan. And they're presumably good on his ongoing legal issues. More on that moving forward. And again, the most controversial thing I'll say on this podcast is that, yeah, based off of the last 2 seasons that Deshaun Watson played football in 2019 and 2020, there's no doubt that he was a better quarterback in those seasons than Matt Ryan. And again, I know that's going to be controversial because I'm sure some of you guys are already jumping in the comments ready to dispute that notion. And I've basically avoided the comments here on Locked On Falcons YouTube these last couple of weeks. I apologize for that, but I probably won't make my triumphant return on today's episode. So, you guys can hash that out. But the thing with Watson is not only did you see him sort of ascend to one of the premier quarterbacks in the league prior to his legal issues coming out last year, he's still a very young quarterback. He's going to turn 27 this upcoming September. And so therefore you look at him and you say, look, the why is that, you're potentially going to get 8 to 10 more years of Deshaun Watson's prime of a high level top 5 quarterback. And there's, from a football standpoint, there's reasons to think that is a massive upgrade over what the Falcons could do either by keeping Matt Ryan or trying to, find a potential replacement for Matt Ryan in this year's draft or next year's draft, which we've talked about 8,000 times on this podcast over the last 6 months. Now, the how of the Falcons pulling off this trade is much harder to explain. And I'll be honest with you, still, it's hard for me to completely wrap my head around all the moving parts that need to sort of fit into place in order to make this possible. And I will say that even though I do believe that the Falcons' interest is legit, that does not necessarily mean that the Falcons will definitely trade for Deshaun Watson, in large part due to, I think, the difficulties that they face with how it needs to work. And the first issue is the salary cap, where the Falcons can, the NFL will not sign off on a trade if you cannot fit the player under your salary cap. And what that means is, with Deshaun Watson, if you're going to acquire him, you're going to need $35 million in salary cap space in order to fit his base salary under your contract. And we know that the Falcons, I think, currently are at like $4 million officially. One of the things that we did talk about with Josh Kendall was how that the Falcons restructure of Matt Ryan has not been officially filed yet. And so therefore, that move to free up $12 million in salary cap space has not been done yet, and probably in a world where the Falcons do wind up acquiring Deshaun Watson will not get done. And we'll explain exactly that why. We don't know quite how much cap space the Falcons saved when they extended Jake Matthews' contract. But again, we sort of guesstimated that would be, say, $7 or $8 million. So let's assume that the Falcons right now with the Jake Matthews extension are $11 million under the salary cap. They could trade Matt Ryan and presumably would have to trade Matt Ryan if they were to acquire Deshaun Watson. They would wind up taking a massive dead money hit, but they still would save about $8 million in salary cap. So that would put them at $19 million. Another 16 to get you to $35 million would come from the Falcons moving on from Grady Jarrett, presumably in a trade. You also get another 3+ for the Tyler Davison cut that happened on Tuesday. So again, we're probably technically at like 14 now with the Jake Matthews extension. So then the Matt Ryan trade would get you to 22, and then Grady Jarrett's potential trade could get you the rest of the way there to that $35 million move. Or again, maybe you could throw in a Deion Jones trade that would get you to 31, and then maybe you can make some other moves to get you the other 4 or something like that. In cutting Mike Davis, cutting Kendall Sheffield, and wouldn't have to trade Grady Jarrett. But the Falcons would have to basically make a bunch of moves in order to create the cap space to acquire Deshaun Watson. And you would have to do all of this, particularly if you're going to trade Matt Ryan, probably prior to the March 19th deadline in which he gets his $7.5 million roster bonus, because presumably if another team were to acquire Matt Ryan in a situation, they would want to have the option to have to renegotiate his contract rather than having to absorb his $16.5 million base salary as well as a $7.5 million roster bonus. So a total of almost $24 million, which would potentially limit the Falcons' options there. So all these moving parts makes me very skeptical of the potential for the Falcons to pull this off. And not only do the Falcons have to make several moves to get under the salary cap to fit Watson, they also have to fork up the price tag, right? And the various reports are out there, that the Texans want at least 3 first round picks as part of this trade, and then 2 other assets is how it was referred to. And I think previous reports a year ago were saying that could potentially be 2 second round picks, that could potentially be a player. It doesn't sound like, from any indications, that if the Falcons were to pull off this trade, it wouldn't be sort of a straight up Deshaun Watson for Matt Ryan trade. Doesn't seem like the Texans would want Matt Ryan. So then you might have to get a third party involved, trade Matt Ryan to, say, a team like the Colts, who are probably the team that I think most people look at as, say, if any team is going to pull off a trade for Matt Ryan, that would have to. So, do you trade Matt Ryan to the Colts first, get, a first round pick, and then you send that first round pick as part of the 3 that you got to give to the Texans? Do you trade Grady Jarrett, try to get a first round pick for him, and use that to send to the Texans as well? Do you then trade your 8th overall selection and use that, or do you trade next year's first round pick as part of it? Again, so many moving parts that kind of have to get done in, I don't know, 72-ish hours for this to happen. Makes me, again, skeptical that something will get done, but we'll just sort of have to see how it all works out, from that standpoint. And then on top of that, you have to deal with the legal issues and the potential looming suspension of Deshaun Watson. And it's, I don't know if funny is the right word, but like, it's interesting that a couple of weeks ago, I was watching one of the Locked On Texans episodes to hear what those guys were talking about, what the Texans offseason plans are, because obviously the Texans have a high pick in this draft. And I'm very curious what their offseason plans are and how that influences who could go number 3 overall in this draft. And I was just thinking, as I was watching John Hickman and Cody Davis talk about whatever, the issue was that they were talking about in an episode, I was just like, I'm not envious of these guys having to deal with the last year of Deshaun Watson. And then this past week, when Deshaun Watson was going ahead of the grand jury, I was sitting there thinking to myself, like, I'm so happy I don't even have to worry about this type of stuff and being up on, like, what does this grand jury stuff mean and all these various things in order to report on this. And it's like, that's just a non-issue for me. And I do not envy those guys from having to do that. And, now I'm seemingly going to have to educate myself on everything that has occurred with Deshaun Watson over the last year, in, the next 24 hours or so to speak, which is not particularly fun for me. But, with Deshaun Watson, as you well know, he has 22 civil suits against him for sexual misconduct, and probably sexual misconduct is the nicest way of referring to it, sexual assault in several cases. But he went to the grand jury this past Friday, and previously I had been referring to it as, the charges were dropped against him. And now I understand that it's important to make the distinction that it wasn't that charges were dropped, it was the grand jury failed to indict him. And that doesn't necessarily mean that he's innocent. It just means that the evidence that was presented to the grand jury, which many have argued in the days since that Friday date, wasn't necessarily a compelling amount of evidence, that the prosecutor basically took it easy in this situation. And, for a variety of reasons, which we won't get into on today's episode, but the grand jury chose not to indict Deshaun Watson. So his criminal aspect is over, right? He's not going to serve any jail time for these ongoing sexual misconduct issues, but there are 22 active civil cases against him. And that's almost certainly going to lead to some form of suspension by the NFL at some point in the future. So again, the team that acquires him, in this case, we're talking about the potential Falcons, are going to have to deal with a looming suspension for Deshaun Watson. And, I've read various reports, over the last week that indicate that at the minimum, it's going to be a 6-game suspension. That's what Ben Roethlisberger got suspended way back in 2010 when he was accused of rape and sexual assault. And, he was not, convicted on that or anything like that. And so, at the very minimum, I've seen reports that say that Watson is expected by NFL teams to get suspended at least 6 games due to, violating the NFL's personal conduct policy. Maybe it's more because of the sizable amount of allegations against him. So even in a world where the Falcons are willing to say, look, we know Deshaun Watson, we know the guy he is from when he was, 10 years old or whatever it was. And we believe that he's a good guy. And we're willing to sign off on that and look past this, which is, fascinating and notable given how much of an emphasis Arthur Blank, I'm going to continue to make that mistake time and time again. But Arthur Blank put on character once, the whole Michael Vick fiasco went down 15 years ago. So it would be very interesting for Arthur Blank to be willing to look the other way for Deshaun Watson in this case. Hypocritical, I'm sure some people would say it. But again, that's why it's so shocking that this is going on. But that being said, if the Falcons were to acquire Deshaun Watson and he were to get slapped with a 6-game suspension, not only would the Falcons have to find a contingency plan at the quarterback position to potentially start 6 games a season. So in addition to acquiring Deshaun Watson, does that mean you go out there and get a Marcus Mariota or somebody like that you expect to come in and potentially have to start the first 6 games of this upcoming season, because Deshaun Watson is not going to take the field until sometime in mid to late October or whatever the case may be, or possibly even later. So again, these are all the factors that complicate this. If it's not clear, again, I'm not expecting the Falcons to trade for Deshaun Watson, but I could be eating those words because so very little of what I thought the Falcons would do this offseason, they have actually done. So this just completely blindsided me. And then, of course, even in a world where the Falcons don't pull off this trade, now that it's out there that the Falcons do want to pull off the trade, what does that affect Matt Ryan's situation? Right. And does Matt Ryan go to the organization and say, look, it's clear that you guys want to move on from me. Let me go. Trade me to the Colts, trade me to somewhere else, or whatever the case may be. And then we have to now spend the next week negotiating a trade for Matt Ryan. So again, that's just something else that we have only scratched the surface of unpacking. So this completely just nuked the Falcons. I had no expectation. I'm sitting here like, got to get great content out here, guys. And then like the Falcons like, oh, you want content, Aaron? We're going to give you all the content that you could possibly want. And I'm just like, no, I don't want this much content. So, we will wrap up today's Locked On Falcons episode talking about the quote unquote normal things that the Falcons did on Tuesday or did not do on Tuesday, with bringing back players like Younghoe Koo and Olamide Zaccheaus, losing players like Russell Gage and Tyler Davidson. And so we will get into all of that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons episode. But as I try to sit here and wrap my head around this whole situation with Deshaun Watson, you guys can go check out the Locked On NFL podcast, which has you covered on all the moves going on around the NFL, including this Deshaun Watson situation. And of course, you can find Locked On NFL on the same podcast platforms that you can find Locked On Falcons, including on YouTube. So, again, going back to what my initial thoughts were going to be on today's episode was, we'll talk about Falcons news and talk with Josh Kendall. And, I have no idea when that Josh Kendall segment, if it will ever air at this point in time, moving forward. So we'll see. Sorry, Josh. We might have to reschedule to get you back on the podcast to react to all this stuff. But on Tuesday, the quote unquote normal moves that the Falcons made was re-signing Younghoe Koo to a 5-year contract worth $24.25 million with $11.5 million guaranteed. That average of $4.85 million a year now makes him the second highest paid kicker in the NFL behind Baltimore's Justin Tucker, who's making $5 million a year on the 2019 extension he signed with that team. And then Koo's guaranteed money of $11.5 million is only behind also Tucker's $12.5 million guaranteed on that 2019 extension. So Koo is firmly the second highest paid kicker in the league, and is well deserved for Younghoe Koo, who's been lights out for the Falcons for the last 2.5 years since taking over from a legend in Matt Bryant, who is certainly potentially on the Mount Rushmore of Falcons players in terms of his impact on helping the Falcons win games. We obviously saw Koo have a similar sort of clutch factor in his ability to help the Falcons with 3 walk-off game-winning field goals this past season, and he's been very good for the Falcons the last couple of years. And so I say, like, I didn't expect that to happen, not because, again, similar to Jake Matthews' extension, it didn't come out of left field. We've been talking for a while now that was a possibility this offseason, but I did not expect the Falcons to actually extend Koo, largely thinking that they would just, re-sign him to his 1-year restricted free agent tender of about $4 million, because I did not think an extension was going to save the Falcons a significant amount of money. But obviously the Falcons were like, nope, let's nip this in the bud and let's keep Younghoe Koo in Atlanta for the next 5 years. So great move for that. Hopefully the Falcons will get something done with Thomas Morstead and Josh Harris to sort of complete the special team set. But obviously they have bigger fish to fry. In other Falcons news, Russell Gage, their wide receiver, is departing. So the Falcons are wide receiver room, as we kind of expected it would be, is going to have to be completely remade. They did keep Olamide Zaccheaus on a restricted free agent tender of about $2.4 million. They have the right of first refusal, which means that the Falcons can match any contract that another team tries to sign Olamide Zaccheaus to, but they will not receive any compensation if that team is successful in signing Zaccheaus, and the Falcons decide not to match that because Zaccheaus was originally an undrafted free agent, and so the Falcons are not going to be owed compensation. And my expectations were that the Falcons would not tender Zaccheaus and try to save some money, try to re-sign him, but probably try to re-sign him for the veteran minimum. So they would not tender him. He would become an unrestricted free agent. They would offer him like a veteran minimum contract, which would save them roughly about $1.5 million over the restricted free agent tender. So I thought that was going to happen, but of course that didn't happen. So the Falcons do have some continuity at the wide receiver position, with Zaccheaus currently atop depth chart at that number one wide receiver spot. And Russell Gage is departing along with Calvin Ridley, along with Julio Jones, along with Mohamed Sanu, along with Taylor Gabriel. So it's just been a mass exodus of wide receivers and a lot of turnover at that position. And this year will not be any different over the last couple of years. Gage is leaving to go to division rival Tampa Bay. Good for Russell Gage in terms of getting paid a lot of money, and he's worked his tail off to go from a 6th-round special teams guy that we thought would be the next Matthew Slater. We thought that maybe there was a chance that he might get moved to cornerback, a position he played at the beginning of his LSU career before moving to wide receiver, and he's wound up working himself to being a number 3 wide receiver on that Buccaneers team. He's a guy that has been killing the Bucs over the last 3 years since being elevated to that number 3 spot after the Mohamed Sanu trade in the 2019 season. And so he's going to help them try to win another Super Bowl. He's essentially going to be replacing Antonio Brown. He's a good fit there. Obviously, with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, he'll probably wind up spending more time playing outside because Godwin primarily lives in the slot. But obviously, Godwin's dealing with an ACL tear that may limit his status at the beginning of the year. So we might see Gage in that regard. The reports, I think, are that it's a 3-year, 30 million, so is averaging about 10 million a year with 20 million guaranteed. And we talked about the hope was to try to get Gage somewhere in that like $7 to $8 million range in terms of his annual average, rather than the $10 million a year. But once the Bucs were offering that, shout out to the Jaguars for completely nuking the wide receiver market with all the deals that they were handing out this offseason. But Gage has been a Bucs killer these last couple of years. In 10 career games where he's had 67 or more receiving yards, 5 of them have come against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. In those 5 games, he's averaged 8 catches for nearly 87 yards. And versus every other team that he's faced since he became Mohamed Sanu's replacement midway through that 2019 season, he's averaged only 4 catches for 45 yards. So essentially his production per game doubles against the Bucs. So now he's going to not cook the Bucs. The only game that he didn't cook the Bucs was that week 2 game this past year where he got injured early in that game and dealt with an ankle injury. But every other game he's been playing lights out against the Bucs. And so now the Falcons will have to deal with that. Call Gage a traitor, call him whatever the case may be. He's doing what's in his best interest, and look, I wouldn't blame him for going to Tampa Bay. But kudos to him, but we will not wish him good luck for obvious reasons. So the last move that the Falcons made on Tuesday was the only move in terms of all these moves that, I sat here and said, you can expect this one to happen. And that was the release of Tyler Davison, saving the team roughly $3.7 million. So that's it, guys. I don't have anything else. I'm still wrapping my head around this. We'll find out more information on Wednesday. As many of you are listening or watching this, we might have an answer on whether or not Deshaun Watson's headed to Atlanta. And I'm sure there's going to be some nuclear fallout, so to speak, from this potential legit, feigned, or whatever you want to call it, interest from this team And so, if you were still skeptical or still in denial that the Falcons, are, may not be as tied to Matt Ryan long term as I'm sure a lot of you guys wish he would be, I feel like this is only furthering that, adding fuel to that fire. So, I'll stop rambling now at the end of the episode. Again, I'm still trying to wrap my head around this, but that's where we're going to leave it. I'm sure we'll be talking about the same thing tomorrow. Maybe we'll drop that Josh Kendall interview on tomorrow's episode, but I'm sure there'll be other issues to talk about as well. So, as I thank you guys for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. Always have recommendations for what your second listen should be instead of, in addition to the local shows like Locked On Braves or Locked On Bulldogs or Locked On Hawks, which you can find on all the same podcast platforms. You can find Locked On Falcons, including on YouTube. Why not check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, where Ryan Tracy and Eric Crocker are giving you lowdown on all these free agent moves and how they're affecting what teams are going to do at the top of the draft. So check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, free and available on all the same podcast platforms that you can find Locked On Falcons. Guys, that is going to do it for us here. I appreciate it. Of course, I'm always welcome for your feedback on this subject or anything else. I'm sure you guys are already fighting it out in the comments already. But of course, you can leave a comment here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. You can send me an email at lockedonfalcons@mail.com, or you can hit me up on Twitter or Facebook at Locked On Falcons. That'll do it for us, guys. Till then.